George, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, just a second. Let me get you in here. There we go. Hey, George, thank you so much for making the time out of I know it was a surprise, so appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, so such is life,
It's like
especially
we,
my life. Especially my life. It's like,
we,
we have a saying around in Massachusetts here: if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute, it will change.
yeah, and you'll find yourself on a live stream with two monks from Seattle, and
Yeah.
that's not exactly the saying, but similar. So we thought we'd keep you on your toes.
Yes. Yes. Well. Being with monastic is a great honor, and Seattle is one of my favorite places. So.
Well, George, just for some context, Ajahn Kovilo and I, Ajahn Kovilo is an Ohioan,
Yep.
and I'm from Washington, and we ordained in the Thai forest tradition. We're starting a monastery here in Seattle, and we basically, one of our favorite parts of the project is actually just getting to interview people from different disciplines who are kind of touching the Dhamma and bringing it into their lives and work in really meaningful ways. And so when Joseph and Gail connected us with you, we were pretty delighted about that. So
Yes, yes. I'm sorry for the mix-up, but I'm happy to be here, and I have to apologize because I do have to at least have a couple of mouthfuls to get my sugar up. Uh,
totally
mental-
fine.
yeah, because my alarm went off. It said my sugar was too low. So
Well, I can read your biography again, and I'll foreground us, and that way it will make you a little bit small, so you can chew in peace. Oh,
Or really, really large.
Okay. So, George Mumford, known as the Performance Whisperer, is a world-renowned speaker and pioneer in sports psychology and mindfulness. Since 1989, so at least some people who are watching this probably weren't even born back then, but he's brought his techniques to athletes, executives, inmates, and Ivy Leaguers, helping Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and Phil Jackson in their respective disciplines, basically be better basketball players, basketball coaches, and he's taught many others as well, Shaq included. So George's approach blends mindfulness, neuroscience, positive psychology, and global spiritual tradition shaped by his own powerful life journey. He's the author of Mindful Athlete, which we mentioned that we've read, and Unlocked, which haven't finished yet, but am enjoying so far. So George is the creator of the George Mumford Quick Hitters app, and we're very happy to have you here with us, George. So I can start off with a question. So that's some of the specifics of your latter life once you've already come to Buddhism and meditation, but maybe you could fill in some of the backstories. What brought you to meditation and to Buddhist teachings?
yes, so actually, I'm coming up July 30th. Will be my 41st year of sobriety and being clean. So what happened was like my butt was on fire. That's what brought me to Buddhism. I had come out of the detox, and I realized I had chronic pain, and just learning how to deal with a drug-free, substance-free lifestyle, I needed some support. So it was recommended to me to go into this stress management class that they were offering at the HMO that I was, um, that I was involved with back at that time. And so I got introduced to the mind body process, but really I got introduced to meditation, and it was suggested that I go to IMS, which is Insight Meditation Society, and do a silent retreat. And so I went up there, and then I was being taught by Larry Rosenberg, who ran the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, and that was my foray into meditation. So I studied at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, continued to do retreats at IMS, Insight Meditation Society, and Larry initially was a Zen practitioner, and then he got into Vipassana, but he was very big in the Thai forest tradition, Ajahn Mahabur and all the folks that were there, Ajahn Chah, and on and on and on. And so that was my foray into it. So the Thai forest tradition was my main practice for a lot of years.
How did you go from there to working with the Chicago Bulls? If you just wanted to give us a kind of
Yes.
brief trajectory into that, that's not something every meditation retreat leads into. Exactly.
No. So what happened was, my backstory is I played basketball in high school, and in college I was going to play basketball as a walk-on, and then I got injured, and that pretty much ended my career in basketball. But I roomed with, you probably won't know him, but his name is Dr. J. Julius Irving. He was my roommate in college. Wow. So a bunch of my friends played in the NBA, but I didn't. And so how do I want to say that? So I actually graduated from college and everything. I was a functional substance abuser, and I was a financial analyst for 16 years. So I worked in corporate. But when I got clean, I went back to school, and I continued to study, Buddhism, meditation, and I actually lived at the Cambridge Center for 6 years. And so while I was transitioning out of my job as a financial analyst, and I took a couple of years off, and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. That was at, I don't know, 30 something. But I got connected with John Kabat-Zinn, and I started working at the Center for Mindfulness, which back in those days was UMass Medical Center, Department of Preventive and Behavioral Medicine, and we were part of the stress reduction program. And so I started teaching what they call mindfulness-based stress reduction. And at the same time, Phil was teaching he was doing a workshop. It was like a fantasy weekend. It was called Beyond Basketball. And John Kabat-Zinn was teaching teaching healthcare providers a 2-week course for, like a course at mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so he knew Phil, and so him and Phil were talking, and this was the summer of '93. And Phil was expressing, or actually Phil's wife, June, was at the time, was expressing the fact that Phil wanted somebody to come in and help the team work with the stress of success, because they had just won 3 NBA championships in a row. And of course, I was a prime candidate because I've been involved with elite athletes and Dr. J. So I had a lot of street cred, and besides, a lot of them came from the same neighborhoods I came from. So they decided that I'd come to training camp and work with the guys, deal with the stress of success. But in the meantime, Michael Jordan's father got murdered, and Michael retired. So they were in full-blown crisis when I went to meet with them in October of 1993. And then that was the beginning of my foray into the athletic domain, teaching. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to serve, and I knew that the Dharma was a way to not only alleviate or reduce suffering, if not eliminate it. It was a really good. It made you flow ready. So I played sports, and I know people know about being in flow, and so just being able to talk to the fellas about flow and being a spiritual warrior, that sort of stuff. So that was, like I said, I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that if I could just be still, if I knew that I would just listen, I just wanted to serve. So there was I had no idea, but there was no trepidation. There was no fear. I knew that I could help. And so that's how I got into it. And it was, like, probably naive on some level, but sometimes having that unshakable belief, that faith that if it could help me do what I did, hell, I could help anybody. If I could do it, anybody could do it. So especially overcoming, a chronic pain and substance abuse. I mean, I lived in the hell realm for a number of years. So, yeah, so it was just something, and that was my teaching. That's one of the things Larry taught me. It's interesting, when I was going to the meditation center, I was just going there, to practice and whatnot. And one day, and we used to have daily meetings, weekly meetings. And one day I go in to have my meeting with Larry, and he says, "Hey, you look pretty happy today. What's going on?" I said, "Well, I took a mental health day off from work." And then he said, "Well, you should make a habit of that. You know, you might want to try that one." So anyway, so when I stopped doing that. Then he said, "Well, I think you should teach." And I said, "Well, I don't want to teach." He said, "That's why I want you to teach, because there's no ego involved." And that's the way my relationship with him, whatever I was attached to, he took away. Then he said, "Well, I think you should do a 90-day silent retreat." And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Well, I don't have money to do that." He said, "Don't worry, I'll spike you the money. I'll give you the money." I said, "No, that's okay. I'll pay. I'll do it." So that was kind of my foray into it. But I had this deep hunger for what the practice was offering, the silence. I'm an introvert anyway, even though people wouldn't know that. But I'm one of 13, and I like my quiet time. I like my privacy. But I'm beyond like the introvert, because I can be extroverted. But I do have to have my silence and my time alone, my solitude. It's just something that I always craved. So obviously it fit well with my temperament.
Yeah, but 90 days is a lot. I mean, even if we like being alone, I'm curious, you talk about flow. Could you describe, maybe if people aren't familiar with that language, what is flow? And I'm curious if your experience of flow, maybe that you had like playing basketball, if that transferred at all to when you started meditating, or does it seem like it's a different skill?
No, it's the same skill. I live in flow a lot. It's But the best way to be in flow is not to try to be in flow. It's very, very paradoxical. But flow is when you're totally in the moment, and you're just being in the moment, and you're riding the waves. You're being like water, like Bruce Lee would say. You're just going with it, but it requires clear goals and immediate feedback. So you obviously have being mindful, being able to observe things in an uncritical way is huge. And one of the things that we're observing is like the four foundations of mindfulness. You're observing the body, feelings, mind states, and mental objects. That's pretty much it. And so learning how to just bring that quality of being, that way of being, into whatever you do, work, love, and play. And so for me, it created an opportunity for me to not only practice, but if you want to learn something, you teach it. This is what I learned early on. If you want to learn something, you teach it. And if you want to keep something, you got to give it away. And so once again, it was like a perfect storm for me to be able to just be creative about how I could talk about this process, how I could talk about this idea of being able to, understand that suffering is something that's part of life, and that there's a cause, and there's a cure, and there's a process, there's a path that you can get on to actually alleviate or get beyond suffering. And so being able to translate that into a language where people could hear it, and the sports is really fascinating, because there's a beginning, middle, and end. So anyway, so to be in flow, you have to have clear goals and immediate feedback, but there has to be this balance between challenges and skills. So it's like you have to be out of your comfort zone. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. If you're not pushing or moving, but as you can see, ambition can be overwhelming. So it has to be this idea of having being challenged, but being out of your comfort zone, but learning, continuing to develop your skills, knowledge, and experience, or become a learner, actually, to be a seeker. It requires that. And what are you seeking? How your internal experience is reflected in the external, and understanding how to relate to things in a way. And the middle way is amazing. It's perfect, like equanimity. This idea of seeking to understand, this idea of realizing that I am not my mistakes. I make mistakes, but they're actually opportunities to learn. And so for me, so when you get in the flow, it's like you're saying yes to whatever comes up, and you're generating hope, but you're creating space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you have the freedom and power to choose. So you have to know who you are, where you're going. And I don't mean like a fixed entity. I mean, what your intention is and who you are being, or what it is you're trying to do. So having an idea, having a way of life where you're evaluating whether you're being helpful or not, not only to yourself but to others. So as you can see, I bring my process has always been, I would go and put it in the Dhammic, in the Four Noble Truths and all of that. But then out of that, I could just focus on what I'm doing now, and this idea of, just being in the moment, just saying yes to life, embracing it and learning from it, but not being compelled by desire or fear, but coming from that equanimity, from the place of, what's my intention. So performance to me is having an intention and being able to express it, being able to bring it through. So it's not just academic or athletic performance, it's everything. What's my intention? Why am how can I serve? How can I embrace the moment, say yes to it, and relate to it in a way that leads to more compassion, more understanding, more peace, if you will.
It's interesting to use hear you reference the word equanimity, because Bhante Analayo's translation of that is equipoise, which seems especially apt for the poise you're talking about. And I'm curious, it seems, I know you've talked about how you can't force yourself into flow, but you can cultivate flow readiness and this pause between, as you said, stimulus and response. But it also seemed like you had to work, and did, with these athletes on two different levels, on the court, just how they move through the game, but also that you had to work with them in their life and,
That's right.
much deeper things. So can you give us a concrete example of both of those strata? Like, how did you work with Shaq or Jordan, or just any of these players, like on the court, to cultivate flow readiness, or to cultivate flow readiness on the court? And then just in their wider life, like how would you work with them in those two fields?
Yes. So I've been doing this for a while, so I'm getting pretty clear about what I do. So basically, I teach self-awareness and self-regulation. So self-regulation is this idea of, we have self-awareness, we make choices, and we are responsible for our choices. And so this idea of this awareness of being self-aware, but it's also how we're relating in the world and whatnot. But self-awareness and self-regulation. This is this idea that, and this is in the emotional intelligence, they talk about self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship development. That's kind of it. So I teach all of that, but I teach, you got to begin with you. So your self-awareness, your ability to self-regulate. You can regulate your thoughts, feelings, your behavior, and even how you interpret things. Well, to be a mindful athlete, you got to be a mindful person. And so how you live, your lifestyle is going to show up in your performance style. And so it's understanding that they're not separate, they're included, and they show up. And so if you don't, so you have to understand that, have to meet them where they are. But this is where it's really important for them to have self-knowledge. You have to know who you are. And when I say that, I don't mean like in a personality, I mean you have to understand that you have a mind, body, heart, and soul, if you will, or spirit. There's the four domains of being, and that to be in flow, you gotta be fully integrated, because flow is really just another way of saying being spontaneous of one's own will. And so most of the time, the unfolding unknown moment is always unfolding, and we have no idea what it's going to be, but we have to be able to say yes to it and relate to it. And so we have to ride the waves of change, or you get hit by them. So it's this idea of just knowing that you have an idea, but in athletics, you have a beginning, middle, and an end. Like if you play basketball, you play 4 quarters. And depending on, well, if you're in college, it might be 2 halves, 20-minute halves or whatever, or in the pros, it might be 12-minute quarters or whatever, depending on. So you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you get immediate feedback. And so it's a really good place to do that. But if you are worried about if you left the toaster oven on when you left the house, or for whatever reason, or you're having a disagreement with it could be even a teammate or with a opposing team or whatnot, you have to be able to bracket that. Or you may have your own self-image, or own self needs about maybe wanting to, engage personally with the other person because they get you upset or whatever. And that takes you out of the flow. It takes you out of the game. So you have to be able to say yes to whatever comes up and make choices. And I feel like we do this all day long. If I go to Whole Foods, when they go in and, now they have the thing where you could use your, I guess you could use your eyes or your print to do things. So things are changing like all the time. And we have to be able to say, okay, I don't understand this. So what is this? And so there has to be this ability to have a beginner's mind or to be able to just look at it without being overwhelmed by it. Now, the young folks, they love this stuff, but there are some of us elders, we're not used to all of this stuff. We might feel intimidated by it, and I'll give you an example. When I bought this years ago, because this young lady's probably in her 30s now, and she has a kid, but when she was like 11 or 12, and I bought an iPhone, I bought a cell phone, and I had just lost mine, so I bought a new one. And so I was staying with her family. My friend, he came and picked me up, and she was, and I was unloading my luggage, and I took the phone out, and she grabbed it and she programmed it in 2 minutes. And I said, well, if you're like that and with everything else, you're gonna be a bad motherfucker. You're gonna be really amazing. and that's exactly what happened. She's a bad motherfucker. She's amazing. But at the time, it was like, it's just seeing that in that generation, and her mom taught computer science in high school or whatever, so she always was working with stuff. But it was the curiosity or the willingness to just take it and just go with what it is. There was no trepidation. And so I feel like all of us have to do that, because especially with AI and everything else, things are changing at such a rapid pace. We have to be able to say, don't know, and how do I relate to this in a way where I'm open to let what's there speak. That's mindfulness, letting what's there speak to you in its own language without judging, without trying to interpret what it means, but to have that raw perception where you're not letting your abstract associative thinking come in and embellish it instead of letting it speak for itself. And I feel like that's a moment-to-moment process, with a little wisdom or clearly knowing and mindfulness there, and asking, what is this? What's my intention? How am I relating to this thing? And a lot of times we have no clue. But that's too scary to think that we don't know what the heck is going on. But I tell people all the time, they say, you're going to give a presentation, how's it going to go? I said, I have no idea, but it's going to be great. And what does that mean? That means that I'm going to show up and see what I can see and let it speak to me, and then meet the situation, embrace it, say yes to it, and then figure out how I can be skillful.
George, I had about probably 25 years ago, I was doing my first meditation retreat. And actually, I think it's probably the third meditation retreat. And halfway through, I'm still like, my mind is going all over the place. And I had this fantasy, which kind of took me over for about half a day. And the fantasy was, this is amazing. I can actually train my mind. And if I can train my mind, I started to believe, in that it's possible to become enlightened. And the thought was, if I can become enlightened, then the best way that I could share my insights with the world is to become like a professional basketball player. And then all the kids will want to be like me in the future. And that was pretty delusional for many reasons. And so I don't think it necessarily works that one who's enlightened will be the best at anything necessarily. Certainly, it's not the case that someone who's an arhat is going to be the best basketball player in the world. It's a different skill. But I'm curious, in working with elite athletes, did you find that they took to meditation more quickly and they were able to meditate maybe more deeply on their first attempts, or did it really depend on the person? Like some of your people who you coached?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I first met Michael Jordan, he had a level of samadhi that was palpable. You could feel it. He's vibrating on a different level. So his ability to focus and be locked in, and I don't think he slept much. I think he was, he had access to that tremendous power, energy. And so I think it's different for each person. But it's interesting, if I may, even with your fantasy of understanding that, you could look at the story, or you could look at what it's saying to you. You're saying that you want to be able to invite people to have a, to want to practice, to want to, like, so being a star basketball player and whatever, you got their attention. And so it's not delusion to me. It's just, it's some communication there if you really look at what's being offered. It's just my opinion. Okay. It's saying that you have a heart and you are trying to come up with a creative way of how you can connect with them to get them to come and join you at the Dharma table and eat. I'm just saying. Just say it. So, because sometimes in our delusional, when we're looking at that, we're comparing what we're doing to what we already know, instead of realizing, no, maybe, maybe not. Don't know mine. There's something there. What's the lesson? What is being communicated? And I think, to me, there's something about athletics, especially with guys, that allows them to do this internal work in a way where they don't think it's the soft, fluffy stuff. It's like when to do this is going to allow me to really be who I am and to really feel, because I think from a psychological point of view, and when you think about how we're raised and whatnot, I think we're always, well, as a substance abuser, we talk about fear, doubt, and insecurity being our companions or whatever. But I think the reality is when we realize that we're powerless and alone, and if we don't understand how to relate to that in a way that allows us to evolve, there's always this idea of feeling powerless. And right now, especially in this country with all the craziness, people are saying they don't know what's going on. And so to me, if you take refuge in the Buddha, a Buddha nature, you take refuge in the Dharma, the teaching, and you take refuge in the community, now you have a frame of orientation where you can actually observe this stuff and feel like, okay, there's a way out. I don't know, but there's something that's holding me. There's something that that allows me to have that equanimity, that equipoise, which is what I call the eye of the hurricane. And so it's just being real with that stuff, man. Just realizing that life is suffering, man. It hurts. It hurts. But how you relate to that hurt depends whether you're free or you're more in prison. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? And so to me, the more I do this, the more I understand. I don't really understand. So last year, I was working with a professional hockey team. And so I went in there, the Edmonton Oilers. When I went in there, I've never worked with a hockey team before, but they thought I could help them. So I went in to see what I could do. But I had to go in there with a beginner's mind. Don't know. All that stuff, all the 30 years working with NBA, being at 10 finals, that was my 10 finals, whatever, that meant nothing. It meant, okay, be here now and see how you can serve. It's just really that simple. Meeting them and giving them some idea of what's possible, creating a possibility. They say, oh, well, it's okay for you. You can be passionate and on purpose. You can care about yourself, but you can go beyond yourself. You can understand it's about the we and not the me. But there's a time when you have to develop the me so you can be part of the we. So it's always this balance of self and other, internal, external, positive, negative. There's always this duality that we're struggling with in the real world, and being able to drop below that and just be is really powerful. And so thinking about it in ways like work, love, and play, it's helpful. But at the end of the day, is you create a process, you create habit patterns, you create a way of being that keeps showing up even when you don't want it to. And so to know yourself so you can be yourself, so you can express yourself, so you can share yourself, seems very practical to me. And so I teach people how to be self-aware, self-regulated, so they can get some level of self-mastery. What does that mean? That means that you always have a choice. No matter what happens to you, you get to choose whether you react to it or respond to it. And when you react to it and you don't want to, you can learn from that and say, okay, that's how. What's the lesson? How do I learn? The growth mindset. How do I seek wisdom to understand what was my mindset? Did I have right view or wrong view? If you have right view, then right speech, right action, right livelihood, right intention, that's going to flow. And that's what I mean by flow. It's like when you see things, when you really are clear about things, then you allow yourself to just go with the flow, go with the motion, So it's like improv, improvisation. If you were to say to me, hey, there's a pink elephant in the room, and I said, no, I'm not trying to hear that one, and I go somewhere else, it breaks the flow. But if I said, okay, make sure it doesn't wear my sneakers, or go in my room, or whatever. I'm saying, but it's really challenging to do that because we have this idea. We're always wanting what's not there, or wanting something to be other. And sorry about that. But
Elephant.
The elephant.
yeah, it's an elephant in the room. But you get what I'm saying. So, and it's funny because I hung out, I lived at meditation center, and I hung out with monks, especially the Thai forest monks, and I was always fascinated. And Prabhakara was always giving me crap about, dude, man, why you have notes? You don't need no notes, man. Just go out there and speak from your heart. Took me decades to figure that out. But you see what I'm saying? So it's like, it's flow is just being present, man, and just allowing things to happen, but being able to express yourself honestly in that moment. So it's spontaneous. So you don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment. But if you, as the Buddha said, do good, avoid evil, and purify the mind, I call it the heart mind, but the chitta, whatever tradition you come out of. But if you do that, it's going to be okay. And I can't tell you what's going to happen, but if you have self-mastery, you're going to be able to make a choice. It's going to be in alignment with your values, be in alignment with whatever your dharma is.
It's there's a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Mahanama Sutta, and it says, when one is recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, one's heart is not overcome with hatred, greed, or delusion.
That's right.
One's mind heads straight based on the Dhamma, and when one's mind heads straight, one gains a sense of joy, a sense of Dhamma, a sense of harmony, basically. And it just is such a kind of perfect speaking to what you're talking about. And what I find meaningful or interesting, I mean, there's so many ways we could go here, but it's one thing to kind of talk about flow with just a pure language of mindfulness, and for some people that's as much as they can hear. But for you, this path is larger, and it is using the Buddhist language and refuge. And I'm curious though about the Black community. What's your sense of why there's so few Black Buddhists that we see? Is it because the kind of meditation communities aren't kind of making a more welcoming space, or do you feel like the Black community is as alienated from their Christianity as a lot of the white community might be, and that's why that disparity? I'm just curious about that sense of refuge and community, and how you see that in the young people of all races, really.
Yeah, well, I grew up Christian Baptist, so the Bible, and I call it, you want to call it Buddha nature, Christ consciousness. You got to find out, but the problem is that we don't talk about going inside. A lot of what it is external materialism, and people think if they just have enough money, if they have enough drugs, or they have enough this, they'll be happy, and they don't need that spiritual stuff. Because I don't use the word sacrifice, I use generosity. See, because some people think they're losing something or not realizing, no, you're actually gaining something. So people perform, or they say yes to something based on how things occur to them, how they see things. And so unless their occurring is altered, unless they see, and it's interesting because, Joseph and I, Prabhakara, we went to this Buddhist teachers gathering in 2010, I think it was. And we're driving there, and I'm laughing, and I say to Joseph, man, I don't even know why I'm coming here, because I'm not a Buddhist. And he started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing, man? He said, you're more Buddhist than anybody I know. I said, what do you mean? And then he says, well, do you take refuges every day? Yeah. Do you do this? Yeah. I said, well, I don't see it that way. I just see it as a natural kind of thing. But when I went there was over 200 teachers, and they all knew who I was. And I had no idea. I thought I was doing this silent, revolution. Well, I don't know what I was doing, but I was just doing what I was doing. But it turns out because I worked with Michael Jordan and some of the other folks, now that made it available. And that's why you weren't far off when you said being a famous basketball player, because MJ and Kobe and they open up the meditation practices so many people because they see, oh wow, you can do that. That helps you. Oh wow, and so you understand what I'm saying. And so, and I didn't realize that, but it gave street cred. So it depends. And I have to tell you, in the old days when there were only a few of us, and I used to call it, I was the onlyest. Now that sounds like broken, not good like English, but it was the only one and the lonely one. the onlyest. That's like George or whatever. But it was like, but at some point I didn't, it was like people said, well, didn't you feel uncomfortable going to IMS and being one or two only ones there and all that? I said, no, I don't have a problem with it. They might have a problem with me being here, but no, that warrior spirit for me was like, no, I'm doing this. I'm not, because I think some people don't have enough. I call it my motivation. Excuse my language. I call it the AOF method of motivation. How I got in there to this. It wasn't because I thought it was intellectually stimulating. My ass was on fire. And so they're still thinking that the dream can be achieved. And it's not until you do all of that. And I think there was something by what's his name? He talked about having all the success and everything and not having, not feeling satisfied. It's just like some people think that if they have just enough money, just enough sex, just enough fame, that they're going to be able to be happy. And it's not until you get disenchanted, like I did, and say, okay, so people told me about meditating when I was in college and Tai Chi. And I said, well, give me a brew and get out of my face. I don't have time for that. I'm going to go do what I do. So you see what I'm saying? So it's not just people of color, it's all people. But when I used to do these people of color retreats, and I'd say something and was profound, I said, the Buddha was a person of color. And they look at me like I was crazy. I said, no, I'm serious. I said, but they don't relate to it that way. They relate it as, it's a white person saying, or this is what, you have to be a certain way or a certain way of being, instead of realizing, no, that's available to you. And that you got to go beyond that, because this is beyond all of that. This is about how do you reconcile that you have a human experience, but you're really a spiritual being. It's really about the spirit. And we can talk about it, but it's energy, E equals MC squared. We can get into that, or quantum physics, whatever you want to get into. But it's this idea of consciousness and being aware of itself. And that if you're not evaluating something based on the level of consciousness, or whether you're in right view or wrong view, then it's a lot of work. It's like when it took me decades to figure out that if my mind was right, then when I meditate, I wouldn't struggle so much, because I have right view. I have either peace or some of the positive, and they call it Brian and Bill theory now. That when you're at positive, your cognitive function and your ability to see and think and develop a cognitive dissonance, or be able to hold the discomfort, is enhanced when you're at positive. That's why we have the Brahma Viharas. Is that those are sublime abodes. So it's like not abiding in anything but that. One of that. And so there's all of these practices that, just teaching people gratitude practice. You gratitude for 5 minutes, and that changes everything. Smiling changes everything. So for me, it's a conundrum, because if I look at it through the lens of Buddhism, or lens of that, it lets me see some things, but not other things. So, but if I realize that, okay, how do I get to a place where I get rid of the noise and clutter? And so how do I get to the blank canvas so there's nothing there? But because nothing is there, everything is there.
Yeah.
And that means anxiety, uncertainty, all of that stuff. But if we can just be still and just observe it. Then at some point, we connect with it. But it's challenging to talk about that stuff. You got to have an experience of it, or they won't know what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so when I can get them, when I talk about it in a way like, okay, well, you see, MJ came down and did that. Well, you can do that too. You have that access, and he's in the moment. How do you be in the moment? How can you say yes to whatever, and then move through that? And if we don't have people that talk about that, we don't have people that share their experience, strength, and hope, we don't know that there's a way. And I'll give you an example. On April 1st, 1984, a friend of mine came by that was addicted to drugs like me. And he came by my house and took me to an AA meeting, and he was sober. And I looked at him and said, whoa, I didn't think I could do that. I said, I thought I was going to die or be in jail institutions or death. And he's showing me that what's possible. And that opened me up. That changed everything. And so the question, to answer your question is, unless they get a vision of possibility that they see that as possible for them, it's not something that's going to occur to them that they should do it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so I spend a lot of my time just creating a vision, a possibility. Of people say, "Oh, I want that, George." Like my friend came by, I said, "Oh, how'd you do that? Where do I go to sign up?"
George, no, that definitely makes sense. And in terms of getting that vision of what's possible, I think for a lot of people who weren't born Buddhist, what gives them this vision that the mind can become still is formal sitting meditation, like they do at IMS. And I'm curious what that looked like with all of the elite athletes that you're teaching. Like, would you have Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan and Shaq and Kobe, would you have them sit down in formal meditation? And how long?
Yeah. We definitely sat together. I call it conspiring.
Conspiring.
We sit together, but they're not going to give you an hour 40. When I first started practicing, it was an hour or 45 minutes. But the research says something to the effect that between 12 and 20 minutes, it's huge. It's a huge, even up to 12 minutes, you can start to regulate a little bit. But not everybody has that ability. But because they're playing sports and they're training, the opportunity for them to focus and then be directed and be in their body is huge. And so a lot of them know how to focus and direct and whatnot. It's just that when they get distracted or they don't know how to deal with some of those, with the hindrances, what hinders their ability to be present and whatnot. And so, so I talk to them about, sometimes I get them into the mindfulness by talking into it, by giving them images and talking about things in a way. It's not always be still and know, but it's a combination. It's a threefold practice. It's not just sitting, but also the idea of, the precepts. Integrity is pretty important. Morality is really important. And I was just watching a YouTube, and they were talking about one of the Bushido masters, Musashi, and he was very, he was a Buddhist, obviously, so he studied and everything, but integrity was really important, and not living in comfort was really important. So there was a certain level of asceticism that was part of his practice, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, being able to say no to the pleasures and just focus on what you're doing. And so it became a religion for him. And so you get this, and that's why the Zen, and the martial arts has always been, because I studied Tai Chi for years. That's been a way in, and that's what I've taught the athletes, is being in your body. And how do you do this? How can you be like MJ? And you have to understand, he's at the free throw line shooting free throws, and there's 15,000 cameras taking a picture of him while he's shooting. And so that's the kind. So you understand what I'm saying? So it's being able to find a way to give them a direct experience. And of course, that's the investigation, isn't it? And the awakening factors is getting a direct experience. See for yourself, get a direct experience of it. And so it's, so I've had a lot of fun just being curious and creative about how to cultivate that ability for them to embody these principles.
You talk about Phil Jackson, the coach of the Bulls, and just as one of the best coaches you've ever seen. And his parents as ministers, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, Pentecostal ministers.
Yeah. So can you speak about like what, you talk about how you helped kind of mold the team or guide them. How did you see what was his technique? What made him work?
Yeah, well, he saw his players as his congregation.
Mm-hmm.
So he prayed for them, and he was interested in them being a whole person. So he would give them books and talk to them, and that's why he brought me in to help them deal with the stress of success. I ended up doing more than that, but it's just he cared about them as human beings. And so he practiced, but it was easy for me to come in and do it because this is what I did. But he was teaching them and leading them in the practices before I got there. But it was just really and him connecting with them. And some of the coaches would get upset that he had he said, well, he won championships because he had good players. Well, other people had those good players and then win championships. He had a relationship with them. This is emotional intelligence. This idea of when you treat people as a whole person, they will gladly, wholeheartedly give their heart to you. So instead of it being your team, your company, it becomes our team, our community. Mm-hmm. And so that's his spiritual and psychological. I mean, he studied philosophy and psychology in college, but him just knowing how to relate to people, how to connect with people, and how to form a community. And of course, he grew up in a church, but he got away from it. The last thing they wanted him to do was be meditating and playing sports and stuff. But he did that. He was the youngest child, so he was able to, get away from that. But yeah, where we come from affects how we see things. And so when you see it, and he said he could never get those. Get to the point where he was speaking in tongues, So in that tradition, if you know that tradition, that's one of the signs that you're elevating. But he didn't do that. But he spent a lot of time in the church, I mean, like every day and stuff like that. But you could see it in his relationship to how he related to people and his view of the spirit. But he knew the spirit was helpful.
George, you talk about coaching people to deal with the stresses of fame. And I mean, one of the teachings of the Buddha, one of the 3 characteristics is this teaching on not self. And all of us, we've got egos that we're working with. But if you've got, thousands, tens of thousands of people cheering you on every move you make as you're walking down a court, how do you help tame others' egos? Like when it's on that stage, how does one work with the truth of not self, or this truth of, the ego isn't everything on that level?
Yeah. So what I do is the not self, they're not going to get that one. I call it the illusion of separateness. So just like when we talk about metta, well, I'm probably going to tell them, don't be hating.
That's good.
You got to meet them where they are. But it's really understanding that, it's just having an experience that, you're separate, but you're a part of. And that's the thing. That's why if you ask most athletes, and when I stopped playing basketball as a team sport, what did I miss? I missed the camaraderie, the community. Because it's something about being connected to something greater than yourself and having, a shared goal or shared vision of what's possible, or core values that you're all aligned with. So so it's them just really, and part of it is just letting them see that, because here's what happens: is you don't beat Father Time. So when I started working with the Bulls, I saw some of the young guys coming in, and then I seen some of the guys that used to be relevant that are not relevant anymore, and then they have to change from being in a primary role to being in a secondary role. And so it's in your face. It's like, because your body doesn't, things change. And so just getting them to get in touch with their heart, and get in touch with getting beyond the illusion of separateness. And every once in a while, you see that, here in Boston, when we had the marathon bombing, it was fascinating to see people were running towards the explosion instead of away from it. and the 9/11, people running into building knowing they could die. But there was something about getting beyond the illusion of separateness where I am the other one. You really realize this personality is just a personality, and there's praise and blame. And I used to tell the players, they're going to tell you one day you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, then the next day you're the biggest goat or choke eyes. And I don't mean greatest of all time. I mean goat.
Mm.
You know, you're going to get that. So you have to, whatever they say, just say thank you and just don't, praise and blame. It's the 8 worldly conditions.
Mm.
That's how I get them. I just talk to them about that. Yeah, it's praise and blame. You're going to have pain and joy, all of that stuff. 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows. You're going to lose. You're not going to always win. You have to be able to embrace it and say, yes, this is what it is, and to go with it. And so it's usually when their butt's on fire or when there's enough pain, there'll be a willingness to say, okay, that didn't work. Why don't I try what you're offering?
Speaking of butts on fire, Dennis Rodman, could you get him to meditate?
Oh yeah, definitely. Dennis is one of my guys. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. Dennis is yes. Yeah, Dennis was fascinating, and he was like, he was fascinating.
George,
so Dennis. So how Phil dealt with Dennis is he saw him as a Hayoka. It's like in the Lakota, because Phil grew up in Montana. He's around the native, Americans. He saw Dennis as a trickster. He did everything different. And one of the Zen koans is the best way to control cows is to give them more space. And so that's how we dealt with Dennis. But then if we can get him on the court, once he got on the court, he was totally professional and he was all in. But getting him when he was off the court, well, that was kind of like, you can throw the dice on that one. but once we got him on the court, once he was in there, you couldn't ask for a better teammate.
George, we're going a little longer than we would usually, and I think we would like to continue, although maybe in about 5 or 10 minutes, we'll switch over to Zoom for those who want. We do want to switch to audience questions, but I just have one personal more question for you. And, we often talk about whether to translate the chitta as mind or heart. And there is a certain quality of sterile dryness or, I'd say a dryness I see in some practitioners. And I don't see it in you. There's a real warmth and love that feels very real and honestly quite heartwarming. And what advice would you give to people for cultivating that quality in a Buddhist practice filled with lists and, very intellectual structures? Like, how do you keep the heart so warm? What's that been like for you?
Saying yes to everything. And just for me, I said I lived in hell for a lot of years, and every day is Christmas or it's in heaven or whatever. I think you get the compassion by saying, first noble truth is suffering, and then there's a way out of it. So for me, it's like when the thing about the elite athletes, if I talk about MJ or Kobe, they embrace everything. They say yes to everything. There's a joy in discovery. There's a joy in wanting to help alleviate suffering. So it's the bodhisattva ideal, I would say, probably more than anything, because when I had the opportunity to write my book, I couldn't write it for me. I just couldn't. But once I saw that it was going to help people, then I could do it. So it's this thing about, and as a Georgism, I say, you got to forget yourself in service to find yourself. Does that make sense? And so it's that, but to me, it's a spirit. It's that energy. It's that love, man. I mean, it's like, the Brahma Viharas, it's that, it's a sublime abode. If you're going to, whether it's, compassion or love and kindness or appreciative joy. And that's one of the things when the last couple of retreats I've taught, I focus on appreciative joy, especially in sports. You need it. It's like, okay, your team loses. Are you going to still celebrate the other team? You got to get beyond that envy and jealousy. So and the thing about it, which is crazy, if you celebrate everybody's success, you're going to be enjoy a lot more.
Mm.
It's crazy, right? But we don't think like that. We think like, oh, I don't like them. I can't go with that, George. I can't. Well, at least tolerate them and say, well, the karma, that what they get is what they put in. It's not personal. Does that make sense? So yeah, I appreciate you saying that, but it's like, I mean, this is. I mean, I love what I'm doing. I love this. The Dharma is, to me, it's like, and I used to challenge my teachers sometimes. And they say, well, how's your practice going? How much are you sitting? And I'm part of me is like, dude, you should be asking me, how my relationship? Am I more compassionate? Am I more loving? Am I more, am I being more kind? Am I being more present to me? And that's just me. That's what I was saying, because we, just saying, okay, you sit a lot, then that. Well, a lot of people sit, but frog will sit, but doesn't mean it's going to get enlightened. So to me, it's like, to me, it's got to be real. It's got to have feeling to it. Maybe that's my Southern Baptist. I don't know, growing up, but it's like, I want to feel that. I want the love. I want to feel the compassion, the love. It's about the love, man. It's about, if you love everything, say yes to everything, then, that letting go, the joy of discovery, but also the joy of seeking to understand, man. That's what it's all about. That's the best stress reducer you can have is this idea of understanding.
There's a quote, I dreamt that life was a joy. I woke and found that life was a duty. I acted and behold, duty was a joy. And I've always really liked that
Yes.
kind of way of summarizing it. We have a lightning round for you, George, since we only have you for 5 more minutes. But we could start with one of them being one of the audience questions, Ajahn, or what do you think?
Well, we don't have that much time. It's a good question, but
we could do, okay, George, we'll have one audience questions for you, and then we'll have a bit of lightning round. And then for those who haven't gotten a chance to ask, we'll go over to Zoom and see if there's a bit of time there.
Nice.
Okay. Great.
This is thank you, George. Is flow synonymous with samadhi, concentration, immersion, or absorption?
I would say you're absorbed in what you're doing in the moment, but it's not to the exclusion of things. It's more inclusionary. It's like I think Ajahn Sumedho calls it, what's he call it? Intuitive awareness. So there's an awareness, but it's not, you don't have to, because when you concentrate, you're locked on one thing and you actually can block out things. Whereas when you're in flow, it's more of a access concentration. It's more like just being with things, and you're locked into things, but there's an ability, there's a movement. I don't know. It's like my Sifu used to call it. She talked about the stillness and movement and stillness. It's this idea of, you're concentrated, but you're not. It's inclusive because you're getting feedback and you're adapting. But here's the interesting thing: when you're in flow, there's no self-consciousness. You're not there. There's no sense. There's no abiding. It's non-abiding. And in the language of Bruce, it's not abiding, just being. It's like being like water, just letting things and allowing things. And there's something about that silence, that stillness. There's a wisdom and creativity that I just can't quantify. Does that make sense? And that answer the question is like, yes. So we look at it, but it's more like just seeing, and it's like there's not a hair's breadth between seeing something and acting. You're acting and you're thinking or whatever is just in alignment. It's like you're not there. That's all I can tell you. You're not there.
Well, George, we might need you to see if we can click you into flow state for this lightning round.
Yes.
For
I don't need any help with that. I'm
Okay. First question. Which NBA legend would you want to see on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and why?
All of them.
All of them. Okay.
What modern day athlete do you think might secretly be a bodhisattva?
All of them.
That's a good answer.
Now, I'm not saying that.
No, that's a good answer.
I'm not saying it as an escape or a cop out. I'm saying it that I don't know. But in my mind, the Buddha nature is in all of them. So Christ consciousness, whatever. So all of them. I say, not this. Once again, that's Ajahn Sumedho coming to intuitive awareness.
Have you ever had a coaching moment where silence was actually more appropriate than a pep talk?
Yes, actually, Phil used to have the team practice in silence.
If you walk into a team huddle and find everyone lost in thought, what's your one-liner to bring them all back to mindfulness?
Be in the moment. The thing I would just say, you're breathing in, breathing out. I would just probably say, now is the time.
What is the most common meditation drill that you'll teach to someone who's totally new to a spiritual path, spiritual discipline?
Awareness of breathing and being in the body.
Okay. If the 5 hindrances were each basketball players, which would be the MVP of messing things up?
If what?
If the 5 hindrances, the Nivarana, were all basketball players, who would be the MVP of messing things up?
That's interesting because they all have their role. I would say distraction.
Okay.
Not being in the moment, being distracted by any one of those. Because when I see the hindrances, I see them as things that color our ability to be in the moment and to see clearly. And so to me, it's not like one of them, it's whatever one, because we all have tendencies. Some tendencies, like when I was before I got in recovery, sensual desire would be mine. Somebody else would be ill will. But doubt is always there. But I'd say the main one is probably restlessness and restlessness and anxiety. Yeah. That one.
Yeah.
Yes.
George, what's this will be I think the final one, but what is the most surprising place that you've ever dropped into stillness?
I would say when in 2020, I was at the University of Virginia. University of Richmond in Virginia, and I got a text saying that Kobe Bryant was killed in a helicopter crash. And so there was in that week, we were pretty close. I lost Kobe, I lost my sister, and I lost one of my best friends from high school. And I realized that I had a piece that couldn't be touched by that. And it didn't come out of nowhere so this is 2020, back in November 22nd, 1989, I was living at the meditation center and I started doing the death awareness practice. And I'd be watching direct TV and, I'd go in and the information, I was watching A Christmas Carol. This dude was born in 1895, dead. That one dead. Nobody in that movie was alive. So I would practice that, but I didn't know. It's like one of those things we call non-declarative implicit learning. You don't know you learn something until it shows up. And when I realized, and I said, well, I talked to one of my Dharma friends about it because I knew if I talked to anybody else, they were going to think I was tripping. What do you mean you don't have any grief? What do you mean there's a peace? I grieve, but there's a peace. There's an equanimity. There's a refuge. And that was for 30-something years of practicing that particular practice.
George, I just want to thank you for everything you shared with us and for taking the time. Even, we caught you in the middle of making dinner and you just stepped completely into this space with us. And it's just a pleasure to meet you. And if you're ever near Seattle, please come to visit us.
I most definitely will. Seattle's one of my favorite places. I just haven't been there in a while, but yes. And I appreciate you all. Thank you for being flexible and allowing me to just ease on down the road, ease into this. And this is why I say I live in Florida. I have no idea what's going to happen, but it's going to be great.
You never know when we're going to call you next, George.
There you go. But that's I still have the opportunity to be spontaneous.
So we've posted a link to the Zoom in the chat. George might return to his day, or maybe he'll join us. We'll see. But we just want to thank you again, George, and we'll see a lot of you over on Zoom in just a second.
You're welcome. Well, I'll hang out a little bit if it's okay.
That'd be great. We'll see you over on Zoom soon. Hang on for a second, George.
Okay.